Hey, Brad, will you teach me how to make a good scone? Mine are either too cake-like or too dry, and maybe my problem is that I use one of those electronic devices to make them. Thank you. Thank you very much. Almost ready with the mic. Next, on our Ignite Learning stage is a high school English teacher at Academic Excellence Online and a master's program facilitator for St. Mary's University. He loves talking about all things in education and networks with educators around the world on Twitter. When he isn't talking about school, he's with his family looking for their next adventure. With his talk called Failing Forward, please welcome Joe Schingen.
When I was 6 years old, I decided that math was too hard and reading was pretty much pointless. And my parents actually didn't really argue that with me. I had a stay-at-home mom, and my dad was a railroad man. We didn't have much, but we had enough. And my mom would go to garage sales to get us clothes for my older brother and me. And it was always exciting when she came home. And one day she held up a royal blue t-shirt that said, "I am a star," across the front in shooting star formation. And I fell in love with that shirt. And I grabbed it and I put it on and I ran outside and showed it off to all the neighborhood kids, of which there were many. And I wore that shirt for weeks with pride. And one day, I took it off and I noticed that there was some writing on the back. And I sounded it out and was devastated to discover that it read, "Girl Scouts of America." On the back. A little embarrassing. I went to my mother and I'm like, "Why did you get this shirt for me?" And she said, "Oh, you're just a boy." I'm like, "Exactly, I am a boy." And I went to my brother and I'm like, "Why didn't you tell me that it said this?" And he said, "I thought you knew." And I'm like, ugh. I remember flopping down in my bed and just seething with embarrassment. And it was later that day that I started reading my first book, Charlotte's Web. Still love that book. When I was 8, I decided to take my dirt bike through a cornfield. It's not a wise move. I didn't realize I was actually taking a shortcut to a friend's house, and I didn't realize that a cornfield in spring was like quicksand. And before I knew it, my bike was buried up to the top part of the frame in mud, with my feet still on the pedals. And I kind of frantically shook to get free, and it didn't take long for me to realize that I was stuck. And I remember looking around to see if there was anyone or anything in earshot, and there was not. And I quickly had to accept the fact that I was in big trouble. And I panicked, and I was scared, and I cried. And I remember these bouts of crying and then coming up with an idea for trying to get free and failing miserably and crying and panicking and trying something new. And I did this for like an hour. It took an hour for me to get myself and my bike dug out of this mess. And I remember when I got home, my mother said, "What happened?" I was shivering and covered in mud. And I said, "It was awesome." And it had become awesome because I had gotten out of that on my own and alive, which was nice. If my dad needed to come out and free me from the mud, it would not have been awesome. It would have been anything but. It would have been a horrible experience for me. My parents were of the generation that believed that their children should just be free out in the world, unsupervised, for hours on end to cheat death and tempt their own fate. and they also highly valued natural consequences. In the neighborhood I grew up in, we had a park about a block and a half from my house. And it was a great park. There were a couple of baseball diamonds, there was a basketball court, tennis courts. And in the summer, it was a busy place. There were always Little League games going on, or adult softball leagues. Concession stands were open. There was always people. And the kids in the neighborhood would congregate there because that's where the action is. And I remember one time of my same 8th year, I was at the park with a couple of friends, and one of my friends was enjoying some Fun Dip. Now, I don't know if you remember what Fun Dip is, but it's like this chalky white candy stick, and you lick it and dip it into this flavored sugary powder thing, right? And it was, you would dip it in and lick it, and it was delicious. So my friend was having some Fun Dip, and my other friend said, hey, I'll give you $1 if you snort some Fun Dip powder. Thinking only of the money, I agreed, and I poured some into my cupped hand, and with both nostrils, and instantly my face just paralyzed, and then I sneezed out this red mist, and right after that, the red snot just started dripping. I was like, oh, and my friends were like silenced, and I'm like, $1. So I got my $1 and I walked home the block and a half like this. And when I got in the kitchen in my house, my dad jumped up and he's like, what happened? He thought that I had a bloody nose because it was just a red, drippy, horrible thing that was happening to my face. And I said, Fun Dip! And he's like, what? I'm like, Fun Dip! And I remember he was just like processing, like, what? And all of a sudden his body relaxed. And he walked me to the bathroom and he helped me wash my face up. And he stood back, and after the 3rd time of me blowing my nose, he goes, how much? And I look down and I'm like, $1. And he goes, was it worth it? And I said, never again. And he patted me on the back and walked out, never said another word. When I was 11, I was in love. Her name was Amy. She was beautiful, graceful. I went to school with her. She lived in the neighborhood. Well, one day, again in the summer, I find myself at the park. Except there's no one really at the park. There's no games going on. The parking lot's empty. I'm there with a couple of friends who are on their bikes, a lot of bikes, and they're jumping the curb with their dirt bikes, and I'm just hanging out. And out of the corner of my eye, the sunlight, something catches the light, and I look over, and there's Amy and her friend on bikes, and they're coming over. And when she gets there, she goes, check out my new bike. And it was a lovely, lovely bike. Metallic blue paint job. It had a nice glittery silver banana seat with a blue stripe and a yellow stripe and a red stripe. You remember that? And she also had the big U-shaped handlebars with the cellophane streamers coming out the end. And I'm like, Amy, that's a really great bike. Can I take it for a ride around the parking lot? She kind of looked at me. All right. Just be careful. I'm like, of course. So I get on her bike and I ride it around a couple of times. And then something in my brain told me that this was the perfect opportunity for me to show Amy what I can do, but but also what her bike can do. And I decided to jump this bad boy off the curb. Oops. Yeah, your responses are correct. You're like, hi, no. And you know what? If I were a parent of myself at that time, I would have stopped myself, but my parents weren't there. So I jumped it. And when I hit, I hit hard, and all my weight went to the front. And those U-shaped handlebars just bent straight down. And my chest hit the gooseneck, and I crashed. And Amy screamed. And I looked back, thinking maybe she was concerned for my welfare. But, I'm sure it was more that her new bike had been mangled. And so I hopped up, acting like I wasn't hurt, and immediately grabbed these handlebars to try to fix them. I felt like I was wrestling with a longhorn cattle, these straight-out handlebars. So I'm trying to bend these handlebars back up, and they went up a little bit, but let's face it, it wasn't going to be back to anything that resembled her bike. And her friend came over and hit me in the arm and gave me that angry face that good friends make when bad things happen. And through tears, Amy gets back on her bike and goes home. Wow, I felt terrible. I mean, she was my future wife. How was I going to dig myself out with this face? Anyways, that's a different talk. So I walk home just feeling terrible, and I go inside, and my parents are there. And they could tell that something bad had happened, but they didn't ask. They didn't ask. And after a few minutes, I said, you remember Amy? Yeah. Well, she had a brand new bike, and I rode it, and I crashed it, and it's pretty much destroyed. And my mom went, huh? And my dad just kind of nodded at me, and he's like, where does Amy live? And I'm like, I told him. And he goes, all right, well, we're going. And I'm like, no, I don't need any more embarrassment. And he stands up, and he's not mad, but he's serious. And he goes, Joe, we're going. So we get in the car, and we go over to Amy's house. My dad gets out, and he's talking to Amy's dad in the driveway. And I come out, and I tell the story, and I apologize. And then I remember my dad writing him a check and giving it to him, which I knew was hard for my dad on several levels. And Amy never came out. We went home. And for the rest of that summer, every time that I wanted to get together with my friends, my dad had some kind of job for me to do first, some kind of chore. And no matter how long it took me or how hard it was like a quarter off that bike. And it took me forever to pay that bike off. And I appreciate that my parents would step aside, let me make my own mistakes. And at the same time, I really appreciate that they made it safe. They made it safe for me to come home covered in mud, come home with red snot dripping out of my face, to admit that I had destroyed an innocent girl's bike. And in doing so, they framed me into a learner, someone who didn't see mistakes as a bad thing, but something that good people do. When I was 18, newly graduated, my girlfriend of 2 years, not Amy, found out that she was accepted at UW Stout. I was going to UMD. And I was fearful that our relationship wasn't going to last those years apart, but I wanted to make it work. So I figured out a solution, and my solution was that I was going to get her a promise ring, and I would take care of it. And so I pitched this idea to my parents, and when I did, they both looked at each other like this, and then back at me. And then to my surprise and delight, my dad said, well, I guess we better go get that ring. And I'm like, really? Oh my God, I can't believe it. What? Like, for the first time ever, he had agreed and validated my idea. And it was a bad idea. I kind of even knew myself that it was bad. So I was like, really? Yeah, let's go. And right then and there, we got in the car and we went. I was shocked. So we get to the jewelry store, and I walk in feeling confident. And I tell the jeweler my plan. And he too kind of shot my dad a look like. And then back at me, and then smiled. And he walks me over to the rings. And he's showing me some rings, and I'm frantically scanning price tags to see if I can afford any of these with the little money I have in my wallet. And out of desperation, I asked the jeweler something that my dad still laughs about to this day. I asked him, "Do you have a fake section?" They didn't. They did not have one. They should, for people like me. They really should, but they didn't. And so we got back in the car, and from the drive from the jewelry store to home ended up being one of the most meaningful conversations that I'd had with my father. He taught me about love and relationships and what it took for a man to make a relationship work. But he could have just told me that in the kitchen. But he didn't. He wanted me to see my plan through, knowing that it would fail, and then teach me what he knew. To me, that's genius, because I have to admit that if he just told me what he knew without me failing, I'm not sure I would have heard him. I'm not sure I would have believed what he had to say. As an adult, I've come to accept that mistakes are a huge part of learning. In fact, I would go as far as to say that the brain learns best when it fails. And so now, when I learn a new song on the guitar or pick up a new skill, I will intentionally study up only briefly. And then I will practice it from memory as if I were an expert. And when I fail, my brain, like all brains when they fail, kicks into hyperfocus. Brad? Got this? Hyperfocus, you know what I'm talking about. It kicks into hyperfocus, and when I go back to study, it more readily sticks. And I feel like I can more deeply and efficiently learn that way. I call it failing forward. That's why I'm here today. Thank you.